Welcome to the Food Bod Pod, and in this episode we're talking about sourdough, and I'm bringing you a couple of new recipes including this fabulous focaccia. You'll need to watch and listen for the secret ingredients, as well as these fabulous fruity loaves. Again, watch and listen to find out what the secret ingredient is. So let's chat. Welcome to another episode, and today it's all about sourdough. And we are here in my kitchen, and I'm surrounded by bowls of dough and some special recipes that I've created just for the podcast. But before we get on to that, I'd like to have a little conversation about springtime and sourdough and what that means for us. Anybody watching the video will see we're in my kitchen and we have... It's attempting to be spring-like.
Spring weather, the wind's
Attempting to
blowing.
be. Having said that,
Threatening
I got
to pour with rain.
wet through this morning. So spring is here. Spring is coming. Let me just grab my thermometer. And this is a brilliant time of year for making sourdough. And the reason being because of the temperatures. So if I just backtrack a bit, something that I talk about a lot when it comes to making sourdough is understanding the temperature in your kitchen. Anything that is made with yeast in any form is going to be affected by heat and cold. That's the tip. That's the standard. That's a given. If you make bread with commercial yeast, you mix it up, you leave it, it's proved in 1 to 2 hours because that's the nature of the yeast. With sourdough, we use less starter, the recipes are designed differently, and they prove for a longer period. So if you read any of my recipes, it states in my recipes, prove overnight or during the day, however you're doing it, for 8 to 10 hours at a temperature of 18 to 20 degrees centigrade. That does not mean you need to control the temperature in your kitchen. It doesn't mean that you need to therefore try and maintain those temperatures. It's merely a starting point and a guide. If the temperature across that time is 18 to 20 degrees, using 50 grams of starter in your dough, the dough will take 8 to 10 hours to fully prove. And to fully prove, want it to double in size.
But one of the things I've noticed, Elaine, is that if the temperature varies from that range, it can have a marked effect on the speed that the dough ferments. So my kitchen will, if the heating's not on in the winter, will or at this time of year, will drop to nearly just over 17 degrees.
Yeah.
That really slows it down.
Yeah, and actually I made notes about this for one of my books. And for every degree centigrade that it dropped overnight in my kitchen, I added an hour. So with the thermometer that I use, and I recommend everybody's got thermometers in their kitchen, I have a couple of these, but with mine you've not only got the readout of what the temperature is right now, but you've got the readout of what it has been over the last 24 hours.
I can see from that the lowest it's been in your kitchen in the past 24 hours is 16.1 centigrade.
Yes.
But the highest it's been is 21.4.
Yeah, so what that helps you to know is to be able to judge. If I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, right, last night it went down to 16 degrees, I know what that's probably going to do tonight then. That helps you to understand. And this is why I always tell people to make copious notes. So if you've made your dough, you've left it, so I leave mine at 9 o'clock at night when I go to bed. I then see at what point it is by the next morning. I know if it's taking 10 hours because it's been down to 17 or 18 overnight, I know what it's going to need to be the next time. Yeah. So when people have messaged me and said, oh, it's gone down to 14, 15 degrees centigrade in my kitchen overnight during the winter, my dough's taking all this time to prove. So is mine. This is normal. This is normal behaviour. And the key with this is to wait it out when it's cold. Or, page 61 of my book, The Sourdough Whisperer, there's a cold weather boost. There are things that you can do to give it a boost.
One of the things that I've done from time to time, if I know the dough isn't going to be ready in time. For me, going to bed, for example, is to move it to a colder room
Yes.
where I know I can leave it. I know it's going to be 14 or 15 degrees in our study because it's right on the end of the house.
Perfect.
And it's the furthest away from the boiler, and the radiator in there isn't actually big enough, so the room never gets really, really warm unless you introduce another form of heating. So put the dough in there, and I know I can leave it safely overnight.
And my view is always better to wake up to a bowl of dough that is underproofed, that needs more time, than to wake up to a bowl that's overproofed and you've got to do something different with the dough.
But what about if it's more than 20 degrees? Now that's where I've always started to panic.
As soon as you start to then go over 20 degrees, or 20, 21 degrees is okay, as soon as you go over 22, then you need to start to change the amount of starter. Now we're going to talk more about this when we come into the summer months. I don't want to jump ahead on that at the moment, but as soon as your temperature goes over, then you need to manage it differently. So the thing to think about it is this: the amount of starter you put in your dough is the power you give it. So as it gets warmer, the best way to reduce that power and to slow down the proving is to just use less starter. And that's how you manage it when it gets warmer. But I want to talk about right now in the spring. This is a lovely, lovely time for making sourdough, because as you saw already, for me overnight, I've got between 16 and 21 degrees. So the 21 degrees would have been at some point during the day yesterday in the kitchen, but it's gone down to 16 overnight, which isn't too bad. So as we start to get warmer and you start to get between 16 and 18 degrees, up to 19 maybe, it's going to be a joy for proving your dough, and it will do exactly what it says on the tin, because it's such a nice time to do it. So if you've struggled over the winter at all with your sourdough, be rest assured, coming into spring, or if you're in the southern hemisphere and you're coming into autumn, these are lovely, lovely times for making sourdough, because we've got such nice even temperatures. There are easy tricks for dealing with the heat, just as there are with the cold, which we will cover as we go through the seasons and as we do more podcasts.
Some people use commercial proofers, don't they? So proofers, you can buy either home proofers or even more expensive things that I could never afford, proofing cabinets. But presumably you can use those with your system, still with your 50 grams of dough for a master recipe of 500 grams of flour, but you just leave it for less time at the increased heat. Yeah,
so in my view, for me personally, I don't think you need the gadgets, but if you are more comfortable with buying a proofing box and you want to try it, proofing boxes don't go down to 18 degrees, do they? They start at about 23 or something.
21, I think.
Yeah, okay. This is where the key is always to watch your dough. You have to watch the dough and not the clock. So whenever people say to me, how long? I can't tell you how long, because you need to judge it. This is why there's a post on my website entitled, How Long? Because how long is a piece of string? There's no answer to it unless you say, how long is it going to proof for at this temperature with this much starter? So there's an entire formula. It's the food board formula. How much starter have you got? What's the temperature going to be during the proving time? And then that will give you the answer to the how long. So if you're using a proving box and you're using my master recipe, you either need to prove it during the day so that you can watch the dough and see what it's going to do, or if you're going to prove it overnight and you want to be safe, just use less starter.
Yeah.
And that sounds really brave for some people, but let me tell you, when it's got really hot, I've gone down to 5 grams of starter, because if it's warm enough, it's going to respond anyway. So you don't need to be scared of doing that.
And that, of course, even with 5 grams of starter, will also reduce the fermentation time, presumably.
Yeah. It would reduce the fermentation time depending on the temperature.
Yes,
because again, you have to have the two together.
If it's very, very warm, if it's high 20s...
Yeah, it still works.
It still works, but with much less starter and less time proofing.
When in doubt, shove it in the fridge. Always. If you have made your dough and you think it's moving too quickly, or you're worried it's going to be overproofed by the time you wake up, stick it in the fridge exactly as it is, in the bowl, with its shower cap on or whatever you use. Stick it in the fridge. When you are up the next morning or when you want to carry on, you take it out the fridge, leave it on the counter to warm up and finish its job.
Now, on that point, I've recently been adopting a slightly hybrid timetable because I prefer to bake first thing in the morning so that I've got fresh bread for lunchtime. And so I usually make bread first thing in the morning. It ferments during the day. In the evening, I put it into the Banneton, and it'll have, say, 12 hours, 10 or 12 hours in the Banneton in the fridge. At this time of year, in our house with our heating, that doesn't quite work because there's not enough. It's just too slow during the day. So I've gone back to your original timetable of making the bread in the late afternoon, evening, leaving it to proof on the counter overnight. Sometimes it's not quite ready when I get up at 6, 7 in the morning, so it might take till 10. But then it goes into the Banneton, into the fridge, and can be in there for 24 hours, sometimes a bit less, sometimes only 20, but it might be 28, 30 hours.
Yep.
And actually, the taste of the final sourdough loaf is improved because of that longer secondary retard, that cold retard, in the fridge. And
again, that comes back to, with a timetable, and again, I have this in my book, The Sourdough Whisperer. If you take any kind of timetable, if you started off with my standard timetable, you can easily move that round the clock. You can take all of the aspects of it and move it round the clock as you need to. As long as you allow for the proving time and you allow the dough the time to do what it needs to do, you can shift those timings around. And then the question of how long can I leave my dough in the fridge, which I often get asked, again, that comes back to, what's the temperature in your fridge? How strong is the dough? Now, we've had people in our Facebook group. I can remember when Andy ended up needing to go into hospital and his dough was in his fridge for 72 hours. He baked it and it was still fine. Yeah. Because it's actually very difficult to ruin. Yeah. You might get a slightly different texture, but it will be fine. But what you'll get is a lot of flavour. And this is the other thing with slowing it down. The longer and slower the fermentation, the more flavour you'll get. So a lot of people think if you whack more starter in, you're going to get more flavour. You're actually not. If you've got less starter and you're giving it longer to ferment and you actually just relax and take on board the joy of that time, you will get a better flavour and you'll get a better texture.
So use the fridge, use the cold, the ability of the fridge to slow things down to your advantage. No more getting up at 3 in the morning.
Never.
Because your dough might have doubled in size by then.
I mean, at this age, I'm always up at 3 in the morning.
But for different reasons.
For different reasons. And I'm sure as hell ain't going to be doing it for my dough. Yes. But nobody should ever be interrupting their sleep for their dough. Unless you are running a bakery or a micro bakery and that's what you choose to do, there's no reason that should ever interrupt your sleep. And being a big fan of my sleep, believe me, that's allowed for in all my recipes. So be brave. Remember, it's a great time of year if you're going to get started now. It's also great for your starter, because your starter will work to some happy timings. The best thing always is to make notes. When you feed your starter, make a note of the time and the room temperature that you fed it. Leave its lid on, leave it on the counter, and as soon as it's ready to the point that you want it to be ready, make a note again of the time and temperature. And if you do that regularly throughout the year, you will see a picture of what happens in your kitchen. It's exactly the same with your dough. This is why I always recommend keeping a journal, because you will be able to build the picture for you. I'm not in your kitchen, so I can only give you the guidance based on all of my experience, because I'm in the UK. We've got a certain kind of weather. You might live somewhere that's higher humidity. You might live somewhere that's higher altitude. You might live somewhere that's drier. And the best way to find the answers for you is to be making those notes. Write everything down, because no small detail is too small. that everything makes a difference. So make the notes, keep the journal, and you will build your own picture in your own book.
One more question about thermometers and about temperatures.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't you ever bother to take the temperature of the dough once you've mixed it?
I don't see that it's necessary.
Because you do read in other recipe books and so on that the internal temperature of the dough should be round about sort of 23, 24. I know, for example, Scott Dealey, who will be welcoming back to the programme a bit later in the season, who makes yeasted doughs for pizza, is very particular about dough temperature when he's mixed it. He actually thinks that a certain temperature range delivers the tasted yeasted pizza bases, but it's different for sourdough.
I think it comes down to, horses for courses. It depends what you choose to do. Personally, I think as long as you understand your room temperature, you don't need to take your dough temperature. But one of the key reasons that people often take dough temperature is if they are in bigger bakeries or they're making bigger batches. If you're making dough using a mixer and it's being mixed a lot, then that friction creates heat in the dough. And if you are in a bakery and you need to be creating loaves that are uniform and the same every time, you need to manage every single detail. So in that scenario, I understand taking the temperature of your dough. When it comes to being home bakers, I just don't see it as necessary. I think it's just a step too far.
That's good advice. I mean, I have to admit, I always mix my dough in my KitchenAid.
But we don't do it for long enough to affect the temperature of the dough.
Exactly. I mean, I do occasionally take it just because I want to know, just I'm
yeah,
curious.
But you like details.
Yeah, and I do find that it's round about 22, 23 degrees, whereas if you did it by hand, it actually might be slightly more than that because you're getting the heat coming from your body.
Yeah, and it depends how warm your hands are, but it depends how far you want to go with it. I don't believe in making sourdough overly scientific and overly detailed. I don't think you need to. But some people's brains love that, and they love all that information. And the fact is, like with everything I write, do what works for you. If that makes you happy and you find that point, Scott is an engineer.
Yeah.
Scott is a detail person.
Absolutely.
And if he will enjoy that.
Yeah.
And if that works for him, that's great. Yeah. Me, I'm a lot more, let's just make it simple. Yeah. Let's shove it together and create beautiful bread.
So never mind the pH value of the dough.
Do you want me to shoot you now? No. On that point, I hope that has made some sense about the temperature. The key thing for people is please understand you do not need to try and manipulate the environment at which you're making your dough. You don't. Unless you're in a big bakery, it's a whole different thing. If you're a home baker, learn to work with your environment. This is the difference between what I do and a lot of other bakers do. Learn to work with what you've got in life as well as sourdough. It makes life a whole lot easier. So that's my final word on it. And what we're going to do is talk about the doughs I've got in front of me, one of which is my master recipe dough, which is just about up to play. And this will give you just another tip again. I started making this mid-afternoon yesterday, and I knew I needed it for us today at whatever time it was going to be. So even though it's spring, it's an easy time of year to make sourdough, I used a very small amount of starter, again to manipulate the timing, because I needed this to be ready for when we wanted it. So that's another thing you can do. You control every element of making sourdough. When you first start making it, you don't think that. You think it controls you. But you can control every element, and the amount of starter you use is a big part of that. So I made this yesterday, just to slow it down a bit this morning before you arrived. I put it in the fridge, so it's a little bit chilly. But this is a very happily proved bowl of dough. Now, if we had time, I might want it to be a little bit higher, but this is in one of the bowls I like to use. So this is my Duralex glass bowl, 23 centimetres across, 9 centimetres deep, and these bowls are perfect for judging how well your dough is proved. They've also got lines engraved on them, And you can use the lines halfway up for fully proving one of my baby master loaves, which is really useful. But for my master recipe, it just needs to come up to the lip. So with this, we're going to call this done for today. I'm going to pull this together and put it in a banneton because it needs doing. And then we're going to show some really fun new doughs. And these are doughs that I have made just for the podcast. So I'm going to pull this dough together in front of me to go into my banneton. I've got my Brockform banneton, which you can get these exact things from Shana Sourdough in the States. You can also get them here easily in the UK. So this is 21.5 centimetres across, often listed as a 500 to 750 gram dough banneton. And I know that dough is less than the weight of this one, but if you're going to look at a banneton, it's better to go a bit smaller than a bit bigger, because that will help you give the shape to your dough. And all I'm going to do with this dough is pull it together to go into my banneton. Look at that. And this is the other way to know about how your dough is. How do you want your dough to be? You want it to be structured. You want to be able to virtually hear it talk. And all I'm doing is pulling my dough into a nice tight ball. And this is a point in my recipe where a lot of people struggle initially again because they worry about squashing the bubbles. This is me bursting bubbles. Because you want to be really firm with that dough as you pull it into a ball.
And you do it all in the bowl?
All in the bowl. Never turn it out.
You don't bother to turn it out and shape it? And
no, none of that faff.
Let it relax?
No, no pre-shaping.
Straight from the bowl
Straight from the bowl
banneton.
into the banneton. So we've got a nice, firm ball of dough. And if you can see, if you watch the video, you'll see it will sit in your hand and keep its shape. So you couldn't, even if you sat on that, it would still come back to life. So don't worry about being firm with it. Don't worry about handling it a lot. You need to be firm with it. And you wouldn't be able to squash it if you tried because it's full of power. You can feel it, can't you, in the dough?
Yeah, absolutely. You once said that you could run that over with a truck.
Yeah.
And it would still spring back.
You know, I had a load of kids here once playing with some dough and oh my gosh, they pushed it, they squashed it and I kind of, and actually they all baked up perfectly. So we've got that in the banneton.
And what about pulling it together now we've held it, it's sort of opening up a bit. Are you going to stitch it together?
No.
Or just leave it to relax in the fridge and find its own shape? Because
the banneton will help shape it, the cold will help shape it. You don't need to faff with it any more than that. And that's the whole point of putting it in the fridge, is the fridge, not only does the fridge time develop flavour, it helps your dough to firm up so that when you're turning it out later to bake it, it holds that shape that you want. So whenever people say to me, oh, can I just skip that bit? You can, but when you turn the dough out, it's going to spread.
Yeah.
But like any part of this, you can do whatever you like.
Yep. So then it goes into the fridge.
Into the fridge.
Right, so that was the standard MR, 500 grams of flour, into the fridge. That's just strong white bread flour. No other kind of flour in that. So it's just a standard white sourdough.
Yes. I love that people call my recipe the MR. Do you know, when I first put my website together and I was just writing up my recipe, I just put master recipe just as a name. I never thought it would become a thing. I should almost trademark it. So yes, that was just my standard master recipe with 500 grams of bread flour and 350 grams of water.
So what are we coming on to now?
Right, we're coming on to a couple of new recipes, especially for this podcast, one of which is sitting in front of us in a loaf pan, ready to go into the fridge, but I'm not going to tell you what's in it. Bloody hell! Ready to go into the oven. One of which...
Okay, so...
I'm not going
to... Yeah, okay, go. Okay.
One of which is sitting in front of us in its loaf pan, having done a second proof, and is ready to go into the oven. So I'm going to tell you what's in it when it comes back out.
Oh, right, okay.
Because this is going to be part of the second recipe.
Is this a quiz? Can I guess?
Starters for one. So I'm going to put that in the oven in the way that I do, I'm going to put it in the cold oven, and then I'm going to turn it on, and we're going to bake it and see what it does. So that's all going to be part of the exciting experience for you today, David. What's it going to be? Dun, dun, dun.
I think it's going to be sourdough, isn't it?
Is it a bird? Is it a plane? So, what we're going to come on to now is, yesterday I went foraging and I picked some lovely wild garlic.
Now, I'm amazed that it's already in season, but you
Yeah,
were
it came out early.
You were chatting earlier and you said that the flowers aren't out yet.
The flowers aren't out yet, but
you
the
can
leaves...
still use it. You can still use the leaves before it flowers.
Yeah, and actually it's better to use the leaves early.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah, if you can use young leaves, people think that they taste better.
Oh, right.
But I picked this yesterday. Now, if you can find wild garlic, that's fabulous. If you can't find wild garlic where you are, you can use spinach. You could use the green bits of your spring onions.
Yeah.
You could use, I believe, scallions.
Scallions are spring onions.
Okay. I was thinking that was something different, but it's the American version, is it?
That's right, yeah.
Okay. So if you can't find wild garlic where you are, there'll be a version of something you can use. You could use spinach and then add a bit of garlic to it, but you might already have the flavour, because what I've done is replace some of the water with an Italian dressing.
Oh.
So this was brought to me by our lovely baker Rhonda, who came to visit me from Oklahoma and bought me various things from her hometown, including this Italian dressing, because she loves it so much.
Lovely.
So what I've done in the dough is replace some of the water. So this is one that I made yesterday. In this bowl we have got a ready-made dough, and as you can see it's very bubbly, David. If you have a sniff,
it smells fabulous. You can see the wild garlic just laying on the top.
Oh, just amazing. So I'm going to put together the dough so you can see what's going to be in it, and then we're going to fast forward as if we've gone blah, 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 across 24 hours, and I'm going to plop that into the pan to prove again, so you can see some of the stages of making this. So this is what it's going to be.
It really does smell.
It smells astounding.
Amazing.
Absolutely amazing. So to make this dough, we're going to have our standard 50 grams of starter.
And is this just a plain white starter? I can see specks in it. So
no, it's just plain white.
just plain white bread
This
flour.
is the specks you can see are just the bubbles.
Oh, right, okay.
So
I thought maybe there was a bit of wholemeal in there, but it's just
it's
straight.
my star.
Yeah.
It's my famous star. We've got the bowl onto the scales, down to 0, and we're just going to take out 50 grams of starter. Tends to be about 2 tablespoonfuls if you get it right.
And if you end up with 52 grams, does it matter?
But look at that, can I just say 50, bang on. If it's 52, if it's 48, it really doesn't matter. Okay, so with this recipe, I've got 50 grams of starter. We're going to do 300 grams of water, and don't worry, I'm going to write all this up, so don't worry about taking notes.
So only 300 grams of
300
water
grams
in
of
this recipe.
water, and I'll explain why.
Because normally in a just a plain white sourdough you'd be 350.
Reason being, because I'm replacing a chunk of the water
Right.
and adding more, so I'm putting in 100 grams of the dressing.
So you can end up with 400 grams.
400 grams of fluid, partly because it's a focaccia, and it's okay if it's a bit more hydrated.
Okay, so this is not going to be a loaf. This is
No,
going to be
we're making this as a focaccia.
Okay, lovely.
So we've got the dressing in there, and I tell you what, there's not much left in it, so I'm just going to tuck a bit more in it.
Yeah, why not?
Yeah, why not? So that's going to bring us a whole wealth of flavour, a whole massive wealth of flavour. But also, because we've got this extra fluid, when you put the leaves in as well, it starts to soak up some of the fluid. So don't be nervous about that.
And it doesn't have any effect on the proofing time?
No, not at all. Actually, it seemed very happy.
Okay.
Yeah, considering that the one that I made yesterday has only got a tiny amount of starter in, it's very happy.
Yeah, yeah.
Sometimes these, these extra ingredients, the dough likes it.
Yeah.
So we're sticking in 500 grams bread flour.
Our favourite strong white bread
Yes.
flour, Matthew's
Our
Churchill.
Churchills.
Absolutely.
And then I'm going to start chopping in some of the wild garlic. Now, what those of you eagle-eyed might have noticed, I'm not adding any salt because the dressing is quite salty.
Yes, yes.
For me, it's quite salty. And depending on your tastes, you might want more.
But if you're making focaccia, you can always sprinkle some rock salt or sea salt on the top of that.
Oh,
anyway,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and make it attractive.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And if you don't have the same seasoning as I've got, or you've got something different, then give it a try.
Yeah.
Just do some, you could even just be doing it with some olive oil and then adding in some extra herbs and flavours yourself. So this was just a case of trying something to see what it would do. And this is also very similar along the lines of a focaccia that I've got coming in my new book, which is the first time I put some of this dressing in something, and that's got a whole load of other stuff in it. Oh, I'll tell you what, it's good. Really good. So all I'm doing with the wild garlic is
I noticed you haven't weighed the garlic.
I'm weighing it as I'm putting it in.
Oh, right, okay.
So I've zeroed it,
Yeah.
and I'm weighing it as I just chop it in, and I've already washed it and dried it.
Yeah.
Dry it carefully, otherwise you're going to be adding all that extra moisture to your dough.
And you're not chopping it particularly.
No, just
it's
roughly.
Just roughly.
Yeah, just roughly.
Shredding it, really. It's not small.
No, this is me.
Yeah.
Rough and ready.
So how much?
So it ends up being, in the end, 25 grams.
Okay.
So I've only got a couple of leaves left. I'm just going to put the whole lot in.
Yeah.
So in the recipe, I've written 25 grams. If you end up with 20, it's fine. If you end up with 30, it's fine. See what you end up foraging. So we've got, if you watch the video, you'll see we've got a very aromatic bowl in front of us.
Incidentally, if you do have wild garlic left over, it makes the most fabulous pesto.
Yes, I can imagine. And I've made so many things like that in the past with wild garlic. So just going to gently move it around to mix it through. And I always start my dough with a big tablespoon to slowly start to mix it together, just so that you're not going hell for leather and ending up with flour everywhere, to be honest.
And could you also do this in a stand mixer, or would it
I would have thought so.
bruise the...
Yeah, but
the
look at
wild
how
garlic?
I'm mixing it. It
Yeah,
hasn't bruised the leaves when I've done it. So it should be absolutely fine. So, as always, I'm going to go in with a bowl scraper. So I've roughly mixed it a bit. And go in with a bowl scraper to
Get all
just
the dry,
mix it
all
through.
the...
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be super smooth at this point. It doesn't have to be anything special. We just want to get the liquid through the flour. God, the smell just keeps coming, doesn't
So
it?
it can be quite a shaggy dough.
Really
at this
shaggy.
stage. Doesn't
Really,
have to be
really.
smooth.
Yeah, it doesn't need to be anything pristine. So all those perfectionists among you, don't worry about it. Leave it shaggy.
4 3/4 minutes at speed 2.
Leave it shaggy. Put a cover on it and walk away. It'll be fine.
And is this going to be left for about an hour, or
Yeah,
rather
do you know-
longer because of the other bits and pieces
Probably
you put in?
it doesn't need to be any longer because of the stuff in it. I'm
Right.
just tending to leave my first mixes longer nowadays
Yeah.
because I think it's nicer when you come back to them. And I've had quite a few people message me and say, why are things slightly different in your third book to your first or second book? You know, because I am leaving my dough sitting for longer. And you know, it's merely because it's my progression. You know, the books have also followed my learning along the way as well.
Yeah, sure.
So they reflect that too. But it doesn't matter, you could leave it for an hour, you could leave it for 2, you could leave it for 3. So we've got...
And the point of leaving, when you
Yeah.
after your initial mix, leaving it for an hour or so, or however long,
Yeah.
is so that the flour can be properly hydrated.
Yeah, so the flour absorbs the water, so that when we then start to come to mix it through, it's not a... I mean, it's still going to be a bit sticky, but it's not going to be a big, sticky, sloppy mess.
And you don't want any lumps of dry flour anywhere, do you?
No, but you'll get that. When you start to mix it through, you'll be able to, you know, make sure there isn't any.
Yeah.
to really a very, very rough mix. Oh God, it smells so good. So this, what we've put in this, the dressing we've put in this has got salt, garlic, pepper, oregano. Whoa.
And you said this recipe is actually in your forthcoming book.
It's along similar lines
Right,
to
okay.
one. This is a special
Because
one.
I'm not going to wait for Christmas before making this, I can assure you.
It's along similar lines, but this is a wild garlic version.
Yeah.
So the one that's coming in my fourth book has got standard garlic in it as opposed to the wild garlic.
Yeah.
So always utensils in some cold water.
Wash them immediately, otherwise
Just straight in cold
rinse
water
them.
to soak, otherwise it will
Goes
dry
like
out.
concrete.
Oh.
Yeah. I do like the look of this dressing. It reminds me a little bit of who was the actor? Robert Redford and Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid.
Oh, okay.
Paul
Newman.
He used to make.
Yes, he has his own, doesn't he?
Yeah, it's still going, I think.
Yeah.
And that they do an Italian. I've seen that in the stores
Yeah, I
in
know what you
the UK.
mean.
If we can't get that particular brand here, but you know, that's fantastic. It smells delicious.
It's lovely, isn't it? And you know, brought all the way
From Oklahoma.
from Oklahoma.
Yeah.
So, what will happen then with that dough? We'll let it sit for an hour or two.
Yep.
Do some pulls and folds on it. Because this is a focaccia, you only need to do a couple of sets of pulls and folds on it. You don't need to be stressing about the structure of this.
Okay.
When we then leave it overnight to prove.
So here's one you made earlier.
Here's one I made earlier. Sticky back plastic.
That is going to be meaningless
I know,
to a lot of people
it's an
who've never seen UK
English
TV
tea
and one
time
particular programme for children called Blue Peter.
Here's one I made earlier. We take our sticky back plastic. Sorry about that. So when you've come to be ready to do something with this, the next stage after this is fully proved is to plop it into your pan.
Proofed or proved?
Proved if you're English, proofed if you're American.
Okay.
Hence why it's proofed in my book, because I have an American publisher.
Right.
So I write in American, but I speak in English.
Barely.
In those. Oi! Thank you very much.
Back to the dough.
Back to the dough. So we've got this very. Oh, look at that, David.
Oh, it's lovely. Oh, and bubbles.
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. It's
As
really
we're
lovely.
holding up the bowl.
You can see the fermentation underneath.
Oh, isn't it beautiful? We're just going to spend the rest of the podcast just going. Oh.
It is such a beautiful thing, isn't it?
Oh. And that.
A sourdough is such a beautiful thing.
And I think when you look at that and you look at that structure, that's what your starter has done.
Yeah.
That's the work of just, and this has only got about 30 grams of starter in it.
Yes.
Because I needed to stretch it out. And that's the work of that, which I think is just fab. Anyway, we now have a big bowl of bubbly dough, and it's quite sloppy because we've got all that extra hydration. That's like my thighs. Anyway.
I'll edit that bit out.
What we're going to do, we've got our pan, just going to whack in a load of olive oil.
Yeah.
And one of the ways to really get great focaccia is a lot of olive oil. If you don't want to use that much, of course you don't have to.
Are you going to spread that out over the pan to make sure it's properly
No,
distributed?
I'm going to plop that in it and it
the
can move
dough's
it around.
yeah.
That will do it. So we're going to
Wow.
plop in the dough into
Wonderful.
the pan.
Wonderful.
Look
And it
at
is quite a
that.
loose dough, actually, isn't it? It's
Very,
because of the
yeah.
extra hydration.
God, the smell.
Yeah.
We're both getting nostrils full of this.
I once read somewhere that if you do put oil in a dough, and I sometimes make olive oil sourdough, and there's a bit of oil in that, a bit of olive oil in that. Sorry, I sometimes make, what are they called?
Whilst David tries to remember that, I'm just flopping the dough over on itself in the pan, so it's all covered in olive oil.
That looks fantastic.
And it looks amazing already, actually.
I sometimes make
Bubbly and textured.
olive sourdough with
Yes.
olives in,
Yes.
and I also put some olive oil in. But I read
Yes.
somewhere that you don't count oil as part of the hydration figure?
No, you don't. No, it depends what you're using and how much you're using, but no, you don't tend to need to.
But something like that dressing you put in would have had water in it as well.
Yes, it was a lot thinner, and I used more. Yeah. But it's the same with honey. I don't allow for honey in hydration.
Yeah.
So no, you don't need to. So, whilst we just adore this and I wash my hands, this is our focaccia dough plopped into the pan, covered in lots of lovely olive oil.
And it's gradually going to spread and fill the pan.
I mean, you would look at it and go, you could probably bake it now, possibly, but if you can make yourself leave it, cover it and leave it for a bit and then bake it a bit later, it's going to be even better.
And you wouldn't put that in the fridge for a secondary proof.
You could.
You could do.
Yeah, so if you say you wanted this for later, or even tomorrow, you could cover it, stick it in the fridge. It will still grow, so when dough goes into the fridge, it doesn't immediately stop because it needs to come down from room temperature.
Slows down.
Yeah, and then it will get to a point where it sleeps. So you could put this, and it's the same with your starter, you could put this dough in the fridge, it will start to bubble a bit and then it will come to a stop. And you could then bake it tomorrow direct from the fridge. You don't need to warm it up again. So you could take it out of the fridge, dimple it in the cold dough and shove it in the fridge. So again, you can manipulate this to whatever timing you want it to be. So I'm going to cover it with another pan over the top for now, let it proof again a bit next to us, and we'll bake it a bit later. So this is the first of our recipes for this podcast alone. And
this is the wild garlic
focaccia. And dressing focaccia. Here is that beautiful focaccia dough having been fully proved. Look at that. You can see the wild garlic all the way through it. And here it is after it's been plopped into the pan and moved around with the olive oil and left to prove again.
Doing its thing, resting for a while, and we're now on to another loaf. We are. And what's this one going to be?
This is a whole concoction of fabulousness. This loaf we're going to make is made with custard.
Ooh.
Yes, because when we were shooting for the book, I bought custard for us to possibly use in one of the shots with something I'd made, which we never got around to using. So I did my usual, what could I do with it? Because no one in this house is going to eat it. So I shoved it in a loaf, and it makes a really nice dough. So I put it in a loaf with some dried fruit. So
wow.
What we've got here, which again you will find written up for the website, we have got dough that is made with a lot of custard.
So this is
and dried fruit.
Slightly more yellow colour, isn't it? It's got a distinct colour to it because of the custard.
Yes, so this is why we're calling it a springtime loaf, because it's a nice bright yellow.
And I suppose we could always, some people might say, well, what's custard? Yeah, custard's very familiar to us here in the UK because we grow up with it. Sometimes called crème anglaise. Not sure what it's called anywhere else in the world, but it's basically a vanilla cream.
Yeah, thick
vanilla cream.
And I have used basically a big pot of supermarket made custard. I did not make the custard. I bought it.
Disappointing.
I know. So it's very beautiful.
Just any supermarket
bright yellow stuff, and you'll see if you're watching the video. You'll see when I plop it out how bright yellow it is.
And could you use cans of
anything, any version of custard,
or make it from powder?
Well, there's a question. So if you remember the loaf that I put in earlier in the oven, this one is slightly different because with that one I put a packet of custard powder in with some water and the dried fruit. So we've got a comparison between what the loaf would be like if we used a packet as opposed to using the ready-made.
And was that packet of custard powder just made up with the quantity of water recommended? Or just using your standard?
I didn't even make the custard. I just put the
stuck
powder
in with the flour.
Yeah, in with the flour, and it said you'd make the custard with 400 mils of water. So that's all I shoved in it. So who knows? So we'll see what's going to happen.
So that tin loaf has got more water in it than you usually put into a recipe.
but because it's got the custard powder and 150 grams of dried fruit, that will all help soak it up.
Yeah.
But also, we're baking it in a tin.
Yes, so
We're baking it in a tin.
doesn't matter too much if it's a bit sloppy.
Yeah, and it is. So what we're going to do, the one that I've got in front of me, we're going to shove aside for a second because that's the fully proofed version. I'm going to mix one up, show you one I made earlier, and then what I'm going to do with this.
Okay.
Okay, so we have got our scales, we've got our bowl.
So this is starting from scratch,
This
mixing all the ingredients.
Absolutely, the starting from scratch. So we're going to use custard, and because it's quite thick, we're going to loosen it a bit with milk.
Okay.
I like to use oat milk. That's just my choice. You can use any milk just to help loosen it up a bit.
And oat milk itself has got quite a creamy
Yeah,
taste as
I
well.
like
so
the
that-
flavour of it.
Yeah.
So we're just going to go in first with our lovely happy starter, our 50 grams of starter. Isn't she beautiful?
Gorgeous.
Plop! There we go. Look at that, 50 grams.
Spot on again.
Because I finished with my starter for the day, she's going back into the fridge.
One of these days I'm going to look inside your fridge and I'm looking to see how many jars of starter you've got in there.
2.
Just 2?
Just 2. And I've only got 2 because I need more at the moment.
Yeah.
Normally I just
But
have
if you're
one.
making 5 or 6 loaves.
But when I'm doing different things, I end up with more
Yeah.
starter. So what we're going to do now is literally plop in. I've done this a couple of different ways in the last day or so, so we're going to play around with this. I will write up the actual full version on the website. We're going to plop in, look at that,
Oh, wow.
400 grams, no, we're going to plop in 500 grams of custard.
Wow.
That, which should be half this pack. Yeah.
So we had 50 grams of starter,
50 grams of starter,
500 grams of
500
custard.
grams of custard, and we're just going to put in 50 grams of milk because it would just need loosening up a bit.
Yeah.
So you might need to see how it is with your flour if you need any more than that. So we're going to give that a swish up. Now, when I first made this and it was sent off to my testers, aka Graham's workmates,
This is your husband's
Yes.
workmates. Yeah.
they said how nice it tasted, and I thought it kind of takes on a bit of a kind of fruit loaf panettone kind of feel. So the first one I made with just raisins, whereas this one we're going to put a mix of dried fruit and dried peel in it, as if we would when we were making something Christmassy. Do we need to pause for a second so I can shoot the dog?
No.
Okay. So we've got our custard, we've got our starter, we've got our milk.
So that's going to have quite you're talking about panettone, which you can almost taste the vanilla in a panettone. This is going to be the same, isn't it?
Yeah, similar kind of feel to it. And it's light.
Yeah.
You're going to feel this, you're going to think it might be heavy because it's a heavy dough, but it's not. Once it's baked, it's light. So I'm now going in with my 500 grams of flour. There we go. Another one bites the dust of the Churchills.
Again, our favourite strong white bread flour in the UK, this is Churchill.
This one I am going to put some salt in, which always seems a bit weird to me when you're making something that's sweet, but you're doing it to bring out the flavour.
Yeah.
And then we're going to add
So how much salt do we put in there? That's
just a teaspoon.
Oh, right, okay.
I only ever put a
5,
teaspoon
7
in.
grams.
Yeah, it works out about 7 grams. And then we're going to add 150 grams. I was going to put the rest of that in. There's about 150 grams in there. I've just used it all up because there was a bit left over in our bowl. So we've got basically what you're looking at the moment is almost like, it's like mix up sundae.
Yeah. So this is sultanas, currants, peel.
It's the kind of thing that you might buy to put in your Christmas cake. It's a really nice mix because it's got some raisin sultanas, it's got dried apricots, it's got dried cranberries, and it's got some bits of mixed peel.
Okay, lovely.
So it's a really nice mix.
Yeah.
Again, bought from a well-known supermarket brand. But you could always use just raisins.
Yeah.
You could use just cranberries. You could make your own mix. So you can go with whatever you want. So we're just going to slowly start to mix it through. And let me tell you, this is a heavy, sticky mix. This is not going to behave like any other dough that you have made, because it's a really heavy, sticky thing. And this I'm going to put in a loaf pan, because the loaf pan will help give it some shape. But you could also do one of my favourites and put it in a bump pan. And anything that's going to give it some shape. So as you can see, David, we're starting to get some of the yellow coming through. It's lumpy as well, so it's heavy, it's lumpy. It doesn't look anything like you think sourdough is going to be.
It's looking like a cake mix.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So this is where, if we start to blur the lines, I just need to get a bowl scraper out. Sorry. Let's get a bowl scraper out of my drawer. This is where it starts to blur the lines. So when my husband Graham takes his all my different braids into work, there is one very lovely lady who we need to name check, called Leona, who produces post-it notes of feedback.
Oh, she takes notes.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. So she takes it very seriously.
Yeah, and gives you some feedback. Excellent.
Yeah, and what I love is Graham will just go, what's from your lane? She wouldn't even ask what's in it. She'll just take it. Yeah. And recently I made 2 huge peanut butter and jam babkas, and I sent one in especially just for her to have as a thank you. And apparently her family wasn't interested, so she just ate the whole thing herself. It makes me very happy, because I am a feeder. And she sent me her feedback.
But how lovely that she's given you, really creative feedback.
And that's what I want.
Yeah.
I don't want people just to go, oh, it's lovely.
No,
I want them to do that too.
Yeah, critique it.
Yeah, but tell me a bit more about what you think about it. So this is dedicated to the owner, and a great big thank you. So look, I mean, David, is really sticky.
Oh, this looks fabulous though.
It's a big,
it looks like it will bake up as a cake.
Mess.
Definitely.
Yeah, and you could do this in a cake pan.
Yeah.
You could, put it in a cake tin. In fact, we might put one of them in a cake tin, just to show that you could do something different with it. But you're gonna get to a point with this where it's just not worth you trying to do anymore.
Yeah.
So just do what you can. Tidy the bowl down, because that's what I would do.
It almost looks as if there's a big egg in it. It's got that lovely rich yellow colour.
But if you think how you make custard, that's just got a load of egg yolks in it, hasn't
true.
it? If you made it from scratch, I believe it has egg yolks in it, doesn't it?
I think it does. Does it have any egg whites in it?
I don't know. I've never made it from scratch.
No.
So there we go. I'm not going to even try and do any more of it than that. So what we've got in front of us is a very sticky, heavy mix. And I'm going to clean my bowl down a bit and cover it, and then show the people in the video and show you what it looks like a few hours later, because I made one of these at 7 o'clock this morning to be able to show you.
Terrific.
No way I can leave that like that.
Do you think you're a little bit
Anal? Yeah.
OCD? Because I am. Because I will spend hours scraping down my sides of my sourdough pot
Is it OCD or is it pride?
I don't know. I know. It's just. I don't know. I think it's OCD.
Yeah, probably. I just believe very much in looking after things.
Yeah.
And Ben's the same. If you saw his clothing drawers.
Really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because to me, if you spent time and money on something, why wouldn't you look after it?
Yeah. Tidy lines and all that.
Yeah. So that's. But that's why I do everything in a bowl. I can't stand mess. It's also because I've been trained by Graham to a certain extent. I used to have a much looser household.
Did you?
When we first met, I used to have things everywhere.
Yeah.
Yes, it was quite different. And then I got trained the body way. Let me just get
How's that loaf doing in the oven?
that's looking good.
Oh, that one smells nice. So you're not using a line or baking part?
Not in this one. I'm cheating because it makes my life easier.
What's that spray? That oil spray? Oh, release a cake.
Yes.
What stuff is it?
So useful.
Mm.
Right. So, okay?
Right, so let's start again. So, and now here's one I made earlier.
Yeah.
Okay. And we're recording.
So what we've got now then in front of me is that heavy sticky mix that we've just made. So I'm going to move that and then show you. Here's what I made earlier. So as you'll see, what's happened is it's just kind of spread and stretched.
It doesn't look as if it's doubled in size.
No, but this is one I made literally a few hours ago to be able to show you.
So it's still got some way to go to.
But what I wanted to show is how it then starts to look. So with this, I made it earlier and moved it around a bit a couple of hours later, and it's the easiest way to deal with this is with a scraper. And I'm going to have to get one out of the drawer again. Sorry about this.
Thank goodness you've got your own scrapers.
So lucky I've got those.
So you're going to move it around a bit with the scraper,
so
just to what time?
I did a first mix with this, I left it for a while, I pulled it together a bit earlier with the scraper. So all I want to do, just one more time, is with the scraper, do the same kind of action to try and lift it over. So I've got the scraper.
It's not too sticky actually.
No, it depends on what you like. I don't like getting sticky, dirty hands.
No.
People know this about me. Other people would probably go in with their hands. I'm just going to use the scraper just to lift it over on itself. So that's all I'm doing, turning the bowl, using the scraper to lift it over on itself. All I'm doing, I just want to make sure that that starter is mixed all the way through. So this doesn't need to be a pristine, mega structured dough, because we're going to put it in a pan.
But clearly the starter is already working because it had grown.
Yeah, and it's bouncy. I mean, look at that. So that's all I've done with this, is just move it around a bit more to make sure it's well mixed. And that's it. All I'm going to do is do this a couple of times, and then we're going to cover it and leave it to prove. And I can stop now, it's just I'm enjoying myself. Look at that.
It looks lovely.
It's lovely.
Well, that's rich, lovely fruit and peel in it too.
This is just a few hours down the road from starting it. And then what happens is, we leave it again, put the lid on, leave it to basically fill the bowl. This is a big dough. So leave it to fill the bowl and it's going to be ready to go. And then what happens is, I'm swapping the bowls in front of me. We end up with a lovely big
And here's another one you made earlier.
And here's another one I made earlier.
So what stage is this? How many ounces is this?
This, I made this yesterday afternoon. This was, I didn't use too much starter in it so I could prove it a long time.
Slow proof.
But normally I would use just my standard 50 grams of starter. This is a heavy dough. And any doughs that are heavy and made with milk will be slow to prove anyway. So this one might take a bit longer. So if it takes longer than normal, don't worry. Just let it do its thing.
And this has also been in the fridge overnight?
No, this is on the counter.
Right, so it's just on the counter, right?
Yeah. I only put it in the fridge for an hour or so this morning to slow it down before you arrived. So this one, we're going to put it together to go into a loaf pan. And again, I wouldn't be too precious about it shaping wise. So I'm using an open Pullman pan.
This is just your normal size Pullman pan?
Yeah, because I like I like the shape that they give. Pullman pans tend to have a higher sides to them. But you could use any loaf pan. You could use cake pan. You could use your bump pan.
No, you're not lining that with parchment paper.
No, all I've done is put a light spray of oil in it.
But they have got holes in the bottom of those, haven't they? So is the dough going to start?
It doesn't, because the dough's quite thick.
Yeah.
But because of the holes, what I tend to do, depending what I'm baking in them, is I often put them on a pan because things do drip through. Yeah. So when I've made things, I'm trying to think now, that have, whether it's been chocolate or a lot of honey or something, they can drip out the bottom.
Yes.
So it's worth protecting underneath them in the oven so they don't end up all over the base of your oven. So all I'm going to do with this dough, is try and pull it into a big fat sausage. And again, I only do this in the bowl. I don't turn the dough out because I can't bothered. So I've pulled it all.
So you're shaping it in the bowl, effectively.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
So I've gone from one side of the bowl and pulling all the dough into the middle. I've tucked the sides in. I turn the bowl 180 degrees and do the same again from the other side.
I noticed you didn't wet your fingers when you did those.
No, I never do.
All right, okay.
You can do if you want to at this stage. It's not going to make too much difference. But I always try and encourage people not to wet their fingers because they basically are changing the dough.
Yeah, you're actually adding.
Yeah, you're adding liquid
to
every time.
Only slightly, but nonetheless you're adding to it. Yeah.
So we want this to just come together in some sort of great big fat sausage, which you can see I now have in my hand, and I'm going to plop that into. So it's the bottom pan. On the top. So we want the smoothest. The top
in the bowl goes on the bottom in the pan.
Yes, that's it. So we want the smoothest part towards the top.
Yeah.
But don't worry if it's rough because it will spread and it will fill the pan. And as you can see, there's not actually that much on my hands because by this point it's not that sticky. And we've got it in the pan. I'm going to cover over it again and leave it on the side to prove. So you've got the two choices. You can either leave it on the counter to prove to grow up. Basically, I want it to be level with the edge of the pan. Either do it on the counter or you can do it in the fridge. If you do it in the fridge, I find if you prove sandwich loaves in the fridge, I find you get a more even shape. That they grow up and make a really nice even finish.
I must admit, I've never had great success cooking sandwich loaves in tins. I don't know why. I tend to do exactly the same as you would do for a dough shaped in a banneton, but it's in the tin and goes in the fridge. I then tend to let it come to room temperature before I bake it.
I wouldn't.
And usually in the hot oven.
I would do it straight in the fridge.
Okay.
What I find is if you've let it grow in the fridge, why would you bring it to room temperature anyway? But as soon as you do, it starts to get bubbles on the top. It starts to lose its shape. So next time you do it, let it grow to the top of the pan to get that nice smooth finish and stick it straight in the oven.
Okay.
And this is something actually, whilst we're talking about this is the kind of thing, if you've got questions like that, if there's things that you would particularly like me to cover or show, please send us the questions, send us the queries, and we will cover as much as we can because we do have other things to cover and guests coming. But if there's something that you would like to talk about or a question you'd like to ask, please do get in touch. A lot of you have got my email address anyway, elaine@foodbodsourdough.com. You can also use our email address, letstalk@foodbodpod.com.
That's the one associated specifically with the podcast.
Yeah.
And there's also a contact form on the website as well.
There is, but you can find me anywhere.
Yeah.
Everybody can find me online anywhere. But if you would like us to include anything in the podcast or any questions you've got, please do send them in. And we will try and include things as much as possible.
So any questions and any suggestions, just write to us, get in touch with us, and we'll include answers and ideas in future episodes in this season.
We will. I'm going to quickly put a bit of water in this bowl, and then the oven is about to beep.
Great.
So here is the first mix of that custard dough. So this is a really heavy, sticky mix, as you can see. But then, once you've started to work with it a bit more, you can see it does loosen up. But you've got that lovely sunshine colour. And then moving on, once it goes into the loaf pan, here it is all tucked away. So that gives you an idea of what to expect. Any second now, in fact in about 30 odd seconds, the oven's going to beep so we can take the first of our loaves out. And this is the one that I made with custard powder and water. So we've got all of these things around us and all of these doughs around us, as you'll see if you're watching. But this is the test one. So I have no idea how much the flavour is going to come through with this because I haven't done it before. And I think it might almost be like adding a bit of sugar to the dough. So I think it might get that kind of feel through it, but I don't know if it'll be as yellow.
But interesting to compare it with the other one where you've used custard.
Yeah.
There goes the beep.
I don't think it'll be as yellow inside.
Wow.
So here we go. We have our loaf.
That looks fabulous.
I think it's going to be interesting.
Yeah.
It smells good. Let's see what it's going to do. Okay.
This is a bit embarrassing if it won't come out the tin.
It will. Sometimes what you need to do is leave it to contract a bit to be able to come out. Other times, one can assist the situation and just ease a bit around the edges. This was a big dough with lots of stuff in it. So yeah, there's just some bits which caught on the sides.
Almost sounds like cutting the loaf, doesn't it?
Here we go.
There we go.
Happens to the best of us, you know.
Oh wow, that looks wonderful.
Look at
What
that.
a lovely shape.
And Pullman's make such a nice shape.
Mm.
So what you can see is it looks a bit like, it looks very much like a fruit loaf.
Yes.
Because you've got all of that dried fruit through it. If we,
Nice and hollow sounding.
yeah, it sounds nice and hollow. And if you've got your pan, if you got your loaf out and say you had put a tray underneath it to protect the base or to stop anything leaking out of the Pullman, if you get it out, sometimes they're a bit pale. You can just put it back in the oven,
Just
uncovered,
like that. Just straight
like that,
onto the
to
oven
finish
rack.
it off a bit.
Yeah.
So it's easy enough to do that. And if you got a loaf out that you felt was a bit loose, depending what you put in it, and you wanted to just add some colour to the base, you can always lie it on its side and put it back in the oven.
Yeah.
But I think this one's going to be okay.
It looks. The colour looks fantastic. It looks
Yeah.
great. I mean,
So
if you saw that on a bakery shop shelf, you'd think, oh, what a lovely looking loaf.
And it's a little bit lumpy, but I think that's okay because
It's
it's
artisan.
Artisan.
That's an artisan.
It's artisan. Made by these fair hands. It is artisan.
I usually use the word artisan to mean didn't quite turn out the way I intended, but
It's how you use the English language to your benefit.
yeah, absolutely. That really does look super.
It's alright, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So let's stick that one to the side, and whilst we've had the oven on, I think we should put this focaccia in.
Yes,
the oven.
indeed. Yeah.
Okay, so as the oven's been on anyway, I'm just going to move the tray up. So I've often asked this question.
So you're using fan oven or?
I always use a fan oven.
Always use convection. Yeah. Okay.
People often say to me, if you've baked from a cold start with your first loaf, do you need to wait for it to cool down again to bake your second loaf? And of course, absolutely not. I mean, that would be, such a waste of energy. I do everything from a cold start as much as possible. I also have 2 ovens, so I can bake more. But if you've baked your first loaf from a cold start and then you've got subsequent loaves to put in, just put them in the hot oven and just bake them for 5 minutes less.
Yeah, just reduce the time a bit.
That's all you need to do.
Yeah.
So we have our, smell of that.
Yeah.
We have our focaccia dough in front of us, and it's not been there long, so it's only spread a little bit. So what I'm going to do is just get a bit of the oil on my fingers.
Dimpling it with your fingers.
Oh,
wonderful.
Look at that.
Oh.
Look at that. Just gonna.
It's a bit like years and years ago, many years ago, when I was at school. I remember our head telling us, it was a female head, that she loved the feel of wet mud in her toes.
Oh!
And whenever I'm making sourdough and dimpling it with my fingers, I always think of that.
Lovely. Right, we have got this very beautiful dimpled dough. I'm going to stick it in the oven. I just want to take a quick picture of it so you can all see it on the video. And we're going to put it in the oven. I've put it up to 200 degrees centigrade fan. So that would be 220 if it was not fan assisted. I'm going to bake it for about 25 minutes and see how it looks. Normally I bake a bit longer because I'm going from cold, but we're going to have a look and see how it does.
And on the recipe on the website, you'll also put the Fahrenheit temperature.
Yeah, have all of the details. That is the sound of the focaccia coming out the oven.
Oh wow, it looks wonderful. Doesn't that look good?
I'm trying to put my microphone over the top so you can hear the bubbling oil.
It really looks lovely. Perfectly baked. Perfectly baked.
How amazing does that smell?
Yeah, it really is.
The challenge now, let me just turn the oven off, is to leave it just briefly before hacking it out.
Well, while that's cooling a bit,
yes.
One thing we're not going to have time to do in this episode is actually bake the second custard fruit loaf that you made in the tin, because that's not going to have time to prove. But you are going to take some photographs of it when you bake it later and put those on the website. I'm
going to, the one that we've put into the loaf pan, I will bake later, and the others, because I've got all these doughs, I will make sure they're baked as well. I might bake them in different pans so that people can see what they can use. And we were saying, while we were stopped recording there, and we were saying earlier that this particular recipe won't be up to being baked just on a free form. No. Let's try again. And we were saying earlier that neither of these recipes will actually work as a free-form loaf. They really are tin loaves. Yeah, well, they're designed, the focaccia is designed to be that, which is why it's such a loose dough. But I'm thinking of the custard and fruit loaf. The custard, I mean, it's just, it would just so spread and sticky. Yeah, I wouldn't even try. I won't be able to shape it at all. Yeah. But which is why I'll try it in some different pans to show what else you could do with it. Okay. But unless you want to stay till dinner time, David. Well, I could stay till breakfast tomorrow morning. I could try them all then. There's a lot coming back on. The loaf, the dough that I put into the pan earlier needs more time to do its second proof. Yeah. So you've been able to see the one that came out that was made with the custard powder. Once it's cooled down a bit, we'll cut into it and I will show photos and videos of how they look. So make sure you go to our YouTube channel, make sure you go to our website, foodbodpod.com, and then you'll be able to see the recipes, you'll be able to see the photos, you'll be able to see the process of all of them so that you don't have to just base it on what we've been saying and try to make notes from that. So we will have everything there for you. But this is the nature of sourdough. It's not going to be ready like that. Exactly. But this... Oh, it just smells great. I think we might need to have some lunch, David. Okay, let's move to the dining table. And here it is. Here's the focaccia in that pan, straight from the oven. Look at that. And then when we cut into it, of course, you get to see not only that wonderful sourdough structure, but also the wild garlic. You've got speckles from the dressing. I really hope you'll try it. We, I have to say, thoroughly enjoyed tucking into it. And then, of course, we just had to follow it up with a little slice of custard loaf. So this is the one that was baked in the tin, in a cake tin, so that you can see a different shape. This went down very well with the testers. as did this one in the loaf pan. So I hope you've enjoyed the episode. I really hope you'll give the recipes a try. And as always, the Food Bod Pod is brought to you with Matthew's Cotswold flour and Shana's sourdough. Happy baking and see you next time.